Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. One of the greatest shows of all time has come to an end. I am absolutely devastated. Thank you everyone for always watching and coming back to me. It honestly means the world. What makes this show brilliant is what it says about us as viewers in terms of which actions we find forgivable and which ones we don't. And more importantly, which characters we demonize and which ones we pedestalize. I think it's very easy to look at someone else's life and pinpoint the exact mistakes that they have made. However, those same lines become very blurred when we start to analyze what we have done, who we have hurt, and what we tell ourselves to justify it. The episode begins with a massive time jump, and the casting for this show is absolutely insane. Some characters remain the same and others just transform completely. I thought the makeup was really well done. Elena has aged gracefully, whereas Lila looks really worn out and tired because she's still mourning the disappearance of her daughter. And at first it seems like everything has settled down. Gennaro is clean, and I thought the way that his connection with Day Day ended was absolutely devastating. At the start of the episode, Elena is gifted with her mother's bracelet. This is a bracelet that she had lost years ago before Marcello and his brothers were killed. And it comes with a note that says, "Forgive me," which is quite ironic considering what took place and what ended up happening to him. And it seems like this signals the end of their time in Naples. Lila and Enzo have decided to sell a basic site. Their relationship has been over for some time, and I think this was a way of just parting on good terms and starting over. In terms of what happens next, Lila makes it clear that she doesn't really know, but one thing is for sure, she just wants to waste time. She has spent her life catering to other people and trying to survive, and now that her son is clean and her daughter is gone, there's really nothing left in this neighborhood for her. It feels like she has lost all interest in the people and the place. She no longer goes outside or tries to socialize with anyone or tries to change anyone's life. She has totally disconnected. Elena keeps grilling her about what she's gonna do, what's the plan, and I don't think Lila is being secretive. I just think she genuinely doesn't know. While they are chatting, we find out that Nadia and Pasquale have been tracked down by the police. We never actually see Nadia and Pasquale again. We only know that Nadia has made a deal with the government and Pasquale is on his way to prison. I thought the difference between Elena and Lila's reaction was very telling. Elena has the audacity and the naivete to think that if Pasquale turns himself into the state, that they might have mercy on him, and Lila is rightfully disgusted. She literally says the state is full of ministers who make friends with people in jail, and Pasquale does not have the connections that Nadia has. This is something I'll touch on towards the end of this video, but Elena is very disconnected from her neighborhood. She lives here, but she knows nothing about it. Most of her time is spent with her peers. She lives in this neighborhood, but I don't really see her interacting with anyone or socializing with anyone outside of Lila. Like, I don't really see her going outside or really trying to interact with the community. I thought her comments about the state were really ignorant. The state is not really friendly to people like Pasquale or to people who grew up in the place that she is now living. I thought it was hilarious when Lila left the apartment and she's like, "You dumb." Like, she's at a loss for words, and I honestly was with her on that one. To try and help him, Elena makes a visit to NINO, and NINO has carved out a very successful life in politics. Which figures because he's a natural born liar. He has a very nice office. People really look at him with respect. And when we first see his secretary, my first thought is old habits really do die hard. And towards the end of the episode, we find out that he's arrested. And my initial thought was he finally slept with the wrong woman, because we never find out what he's charged with. They just tell us that it's serious, but I can't help but think he finally flew too close to the sun. This is something I will circle back to, but it feels like no one has made it out of this neighborhood, either physically or emotionally or spiritually. Like, everybody kind of ends up right back to where they started, but worse. On the bright side, NINO's relationship to his daughter appears to be a lot stronger. She ran towards him, so it seems that they do spend time together. It might not be much, but it is enough for her to be comfortable around him. Elena asks NINO to look out for Pasquale, and NINO kind of gives her a pre-recorded response. It felt very cold. It felt like kind of like something a government official would say. His thoughts are Nadia is doing what she has to do to survive, and Pasquale made his bed and he should lie in it. At one point, he looks at Ima and tells her, listen, if you ever get in trouble, you can go ahead and call me. And Elena is looking at him as that's precisely the point. Pasquale has no one to call. That's why I'm here. And although NINO understood her point, he just wasn't willing to use his political capital to save a man that he really just doesn't have anything in common with anymore. Elena doesn't tell NINO that she thinks Pasquale and Nadia killed Marcello and his brother. And to be honest, she probably should have, because we know that NINO hated those brothers, so it might have actually worked in her favor. During their time with NINO, they go out for lunch, and you can see how popular NINO is. Like, he is really just the center of attention, and he has started to really socialize with people that he used to criticize. Elena notices him, and she's almost just in awe of how this man is able to transform. And she asks him, who are you? What have you become? And people like NINO are worse than Pasquale, because they are criminals that create laws to criminalize other criminals. And NINO says something quite profound. He tells her to play with literature with your friend, but do not talk about things that don't concern you or you don't understand. I think what NINO was telling her, and rightfully so, is they're actually not that different. He knows that he's using the people around him to advance himself. And at the end of the day, NINO and Elena, they run in similar circles. The only difference is NINO knows he's using people and Elena remains willfully ignorant to it. NINO, for better or worse, is not delusional about the ugliness of the system. He knows very well what they're up against. And I feel like he was basically telling her, listen, it's not me who's lost, it's you that has it confused. At the end of the day, you're doing the same thing I'm doing, just in a different way. And as expected, following that lunch, NINO does nothing, which, to be honest, like, there's not much we can expect from this man. Last we hear from him, he is on his way to jail with Pasquale. I really do think that NINO ended up messing with the wrong person, or should I say the wrong person's wife. When Elena comes home, she finds that her daughter is missing, and what's worse, she ran off with Lila's son Gennaro. And Elena's daughters are not close at all, and in a lot of ways they do mirror her mother, because from what we've seen of Elena, she's not that close to her siblings. Like, she looks out for them, but they don't really have this bond. They don't talk daily, if at all. And it seems like Dede has been covering for her sister for some time. Elsa appears to be a rolling stone, and due to her mother's lack of supervision, it seems like Elsa does whatever she wants whenever she wants. And Lila has commented on this before, that Elena does not watch her children enough, and therefore there's a lot that she doesn't really notice. It would be one thing for Elsa to just run away. She ends up running away and stealing all her mother's valuables. And to make matters worse, she leaves her mother a crazy note. And both Elsa and Dede know that they are not their mother's first priority. Elena has only cared about her writing and about Lila. And something else I've noticed about Elena is that she's never really found her daughters particularly interesting. Like, she doesn't really ask about them. She doesn't really obsess about them in any way. Like, the only person we've seen her obsess about is Lila and NINO. I thought the way that she scolded Dede was hilarious. So she definitely knows who her daughters are at their core, because she called Elsa a vain and sly girl. So she was aware that Elsa was maybe playing in her face a bit, but she didn't really have time to shut that down. And I think Dede is Elena's favorite child, and maybe she placed a lot of responsibility on her to watch her sister. Instead, all she did was cover for her. And in Elsa's raggedy note, she tells her mother that I'm done with your cult of studying. And she makes a line that I think is really interesting, like, good books don't make good people. And I think there's definitely a difference between education and knowledge. And just because you're well educated on paper doesn't mean you know as much about the world as you think you do. And you saw that with Elena's reaction to Pasquale and her opinions about the state. She has become so desensitized to what's going on around her, not just with her family, but with Naples itself. Everything just seems to be taking her by surprise. Elsa's disappearance is quite terrifying, because first, she ran away with a former drug addict, and I don't think Elena really trusts Gennaro all that much. And the thought of her daughter going missing or something happening to her hits a little too close to home, especially after what happened with Tina. In a panic, she goes over to Lila's house and she threatens Lila. She says, listen, I'm gonna call the police. And Lila is like, what do you want me to do about it? Like, she's in shock. And the way her reaction made me laugh, she's like, listen, there's more to laugh about than to cry about. Come inside and we can just kick it for a bit. Because even Lila was taken aback because she's like, Elsa? And for better or worse, Gennaro is a lot of things, but he is not a thief and he did not betray anyone. Like, what Elsa did to me is a sign of very poor character, and that's something that Lila has been trying to warn Elena about. Like, your daughters are not being raised in the right way. And you see that with the way that Elsa just completely disregarded her mother and her sister. And Lila just didn't want to hear anything about it, so Enzo ends up going with her. And during this car ride, we find out that Enzo is still as devastated as he was in the last episode. He's basically been frozen in time. During this car ride, he opens up about Tina's disappearance and how devastated he has been. I think if a child dies, at least you can mourn the child, but when a child disappears, you don't know what to do with yourself. This is a nightmare worse than death. Change the subject, he asks Elena about her writing. And Elena opens up and says, listen, I don't know what to write about anymore. I've been writing articles and, smaller pieces, but I don't really know what I want for a novel. And Enzo is almost just enamored by her passion. And he makes a comment that I thought was very profound. You live in a world that you have chosen and you are completely absorbed by it. Whereas Lila, unfortunately, has slipped into the void of her daughter's disappearance, and she has been completely absorbed by that. So Lila is stuck in a world not of her choosing. This is something that she really has no say over. Whereas Elena at least still has the freedom to explore and to figure out what she wants to do with herself. Eventually they find Elsa's acquaintance, and that scene was so strange because at first I really thought that she was in there, and I thought this was going to turn into a fight, but turns out the guy was super calm, and they did actually end up finding Elsa. She was at her grandparents' house. Elena's reaction to finding her daughter, like, you could feel the relief. Enzo could feel the relief because she really didn't know what to expect. I think Elsa's disappearance finally motivates Elena to leave the neighborhood. And I'm really surprised that she stayed on for as long as she did. Elena goes over to Pietro's parents' house. And this was so awkward because you can tell she hasn't seen them in so long. They tried to hug her, they tried to embrace her, but she just looks like she wants nothing to do with them. And she goes straight to her daughter and she starts to scold her. And I will defend Elsa. Everything that she said was correct. Her mother forced them to move to this raggedy neighborhood in the ghetto. Not for her daughters, by the way. The reason they're living in Naples is for Elena's obsession. It's for her writing. And this has come at the expense of her daughters. And now we're seeing the effect of that. Elena's daughters come from money. They have resources. And being in that neighborhood, I think, must be really interesting because I wonder what their experience is like in school. Because in a lot of ways, they can't really relate to a lot of what's happening here. Like, they might live there, but they don't really understand how it works. And I think Elena does, on some deep level, know that this is her fault. And so she agrees to let Elsa stay with her grandparents. And when she moves back home, she can live in the apartment with Gennaro. And she knows that eventually Elsa will get sick of him. And I think Elsa's attraction to Lila's son had to do with wanting something she couldn't have. Some part of her may have felt satisfied stealing him away from Dede. And this whole situation severs their bond as sisters. And I don't think Dede and Elsa were ever really that close. I think Dede always covered for Elsa. Dede decides she's going to go to America and, be with her father. And I thought what Pietro said about affection and how they failed as parents was really telling, because these girls are loved, but they haven't been loved continuously. And they've always felt that they were not the most important thing in their parents' lives. Pietro has always been more concerned with his writing, and Elena has always been more concerned with NINO or Lila or her writing, but these girls were never a concern to either parent. And I thought that the fact that her children could go to America to study was a huge generational success. Like, these girls will achieve more success than their parents have ever dreamed of. Before leaving, Dede almost has a panic attack and she hugs her mother. And Elena makes a comment like she never noticed how grown up Day Day is. It seems like their bond, like they're not that affectionate of a family. Like if you notice with Lila and Tina, like she's very affectionate with the girls, but Elena never really had that affection. Like this is the closest that they have come, this final goodbye. And I think Elena even notes that they were even disgusted with her. Like they didn't even like brushing past her. I think that has to do with the fact that they have always felt like a secondary concern. I thought the airport scene was really done in terms of showing how time is passing and things are changing and people are slowly starting to disappear and leave Elena's life. And as predicted, Elsa eventually gets tired of Gennaro and moves to America for a better life. And I love how Elsa got tired of Gennaro, but Gennaro did not get tired of that apartment. And then we get another huge time jump. Nadia is a lot older and Ima seems very well adjusted. And I thought it was really interesting how Ima's connection to Lila has actually strengthened. It seems like she's really helped her study. It seems like she's really helped her put the pieces back together. And just before we find out about NINO's arrest, Ima informs her about her outing with Lila. Lila apparently took her to an abandoned building, informing her that spirits dwell here. And I think Lila is desperately looking for signs of her daughter. The fact that she went missing in Naples is something that really haunts her because she doesn't know if her daughter is still around, under her nose, or just completely out of sight. And something that Ima says that Lila told her, how the souls of the dead continue to test the living. And right now, Lila's test is simply staying alive. Like she just has a difficult time going through the motions. And NINO's arrest pretty much triggers the end of Elena's time in the neighborhood. I thought this final conversation between Lila and Elena was really well shot. Elena basically says, listen, I can't stay here anymore. And Lila, although she's disappointed, she's not that surprised. And she takes this moment to get everything off her chest, specifically her theory about what happened to Tina. She looks at Elena and she's almost really surprised that this thought never occurred to her. And she explains how that photograph where Tina was referred to as Elena's daughter might have triggered this whole thing. Elena at the time was super famous. She was in all the newspapers. She was in the media. So it's not that far-fetched to think that someone would want to kidnap Ima for ransom. A part of the reason why Lila was obsessed with taking care of Elena's daughters is because she didn't want the kidnappers to come back. And this news really shocks Elena. She thinks at first she's saying it to get back at her. And I thought the scene of her just standing there thinking about all these things was very funny because Lila is looking at her like, I know exactly what you're thinking, but I'm just going to wait till you finish thinking it before I respond. And Elena's immediate reaction is, what are you writing about? So Gennaro informs her that Lila has been writing. Now, what she's writing about, we don't know. For all we know, Lila is plotting her escape. Maybe we don't know what she's working on. It's not necessarily a novel. It could be anything. We know she's very good with computers. Maybe she found a new line of work. We're not really sure. Lila makes it very clear that the only thing that she's sure of is she wants to disappear. Working in tech has taught her how easily it is for people to trace you or find you, and she wants to be untraceable. She wants to be gone. And I think Elena's obsession with Lila writing a book that might outshine her or might expose her in a way that she might not want, I think is really interesting because Lila at this point is at rock bottom. She has lost her daughter, and she makes a comment like, for me to write a book, that would imply that I want something to outlive me. But at the moment, I just want to disappear. I don't want anyone to see me. I don't want anyone to look at me. So please respect my wishes. I thought what she said about Ima was super heartbreaking. She has waited in this apartment patiently, hoping that her daughter would come back, but she's never coming back. She's gone. And I think some part of her finally realized that it's time to go. I thought their final hug was spectacularly shot. It happens out of nowhere and so suddenly, and I actually felt very emotional because this was really the end of their time together. And Lila wishes her the best. You know, she's like, go on and do better things. And the way that they have maintained their friendship for so long is extraordinary. And I think Elena describes it really well. Like, any intense relationship with a human being is full of traps. And if you want to maintain that relationship, you need to somehow avoid these traps. And this was easier said than done. You have to be very strong to know what fights to avoid and which ones to engage in if you want to maintain a friendship like this. On their way out of Naples, we see that Emma's eye twitch was back, and that really broke my heart. And I think a lot of that has to do with NINO's arrest. Emma is completely devastated because it seems like she had this bond with her father. And maybe she's devastated because some part of her also grew attached to the neighborhood, to Lila, and leaving behind this community also means leaving Tina behind. Fast forward years later, we meet a much older Elena, and she receives a call from Gennaro, who informs us that Lila has disappeared. And this disappearance really shocks an older Elena, and it makes her very mad and very frustrated. And at one point, she imagines a younger Lila. And it seems like they haven't spoken in a number of years, and this really makes her angry. And so as a form of retaliation, I would say, she starts to write Lila's story. And just as she finished this novel, she receives a package in the mail, and it's of these two dolls they used to play with when they were children. And these dolls just leave her completely shook. It leaves the audience shook because we don't really know what these dolls mean. Does that mean that Lila is okay? Does that mean that she found Tina? Does that mean that she's telling her that she's proud of her for everything that she's accomplished? What does this mean? I thought the last line of the series was really eerie. She says, now that Lila has shown herself so clearly, I must resign myself to never seeing her again. And there's a lot to unpack here. I thought the fact that Lila has had these dolls for all these years really highlights how unreliable of a narrator Elena is. The title of the series, My Brilliant Friend, has always haunted me because on one hand, Elena's story is pretty textbook. She comes from nothing, she becomes successful, she's essentially the poster child for feminist ideals. Lila, on the other hand, is not. And what makes Lila unique is that she is the story. There is no Elena without Lila. And even when Lila is not on screen, her presence is felt, and this is the same in the books. And this whole idea of my brilliant friend, like who is the brilliant friend, I think really comes down to who gets to be the brilliant friend, like who gets to be known as the brilliant friend. And the glory of Lila's life will go to Elena. It will not go to Lila. Lila's life has been absolute hell. Although she's brilliant, she's never really had the opportunities to thrive and become as successful as she would have liked. And to make matters worse, her memory is being kept alive by an individual that doesn't really know her as deeply as she thinks she does. I remember in an earlier episode, Lila describes dissolving boundaries, and Elena responds by stating that her superpower has always been to find stability where others could not. And Elena's motivation to write about Lila is to stabilize her, is to prevent her from disappearing, even though Lila has made it very clear that she wants to remain elusive. And I think when she gets these dolls in the mail, it shatters everything that she thought about her. She's right back to where she started, trying to understand Lila. And although Elena's book ends neatly, the series does not. The book does not. It ends in chaos. I think Lila's disposability has always been very interesting to me. People like Lila, Enzo, Pasquale, they represent a class of people that Elena has long lost touch with. And to make matters worse, they also represent a class of people who have been written about without their input or without their consent by well-meaning elites like Elena who just want to tell an important story. Up until the end of the episode, you see the last shot. She is just as confused. Like, she has more questions than answers for us. And when you think about Lila's actual disappearance, it's been coming for some time. Her whole life has been a fight to stay alive and a fight to be seen and acknowledged. And the disappearance still messes with me. Like, I have to read this book again because it comes as a complete shock. And there are moments in the novel that are incredibly frustrating where you kind of wonder if Elena knows anything about anyone. Like, there's a point in these books where you're just like, girl, did you take Tina and you just like didn't remember? Like, are you the Zodiac? Is there something that you want to tell us? Like, the whole thing becomes so crazy. I think the disappearance and the shock of it was meant to maybe invite audiences to rethink what they know about Lila and everybody else in this neighborhood. Like, there are a lot of moments in this novel, like I can highlight NINO cheating, that in the book comes as a surprise. Even in the series, like, we were all stunned, and in the moment it left us stranded, but in hindsight, it was entirely predictable. I think Lila's final goodbye with these dolls was a way of telling her that the only person who has power over my story is me. Lila has never been subject to anyone's interpretations of her, whether it be her parents, her husband, those awful brothers, and her best friend, Elena Greco. So while the rest of us are sitting here with Elena scratching our heads, wondering what just happened, we can only hope and pray that Lila has finally found the peace that she was looking for. I think if I had the time, I would rewatch the series and reread the novels with a focus only on Lila, because what makes this novel unique and even the series is that it's very authentic. Like, this is Elena's truth. But it's only Elena's truth. This is not Lila's truth. This is not Enzo's truth. This is not NINO's truth. Like, this is her story. And we really have to remember that. And the way that Lila kind of disrupts that, I think, is really important. Overall, I was highly impressed. I think this is an excellent series. You guys let me know what you think, and until next time.